Hi, folks. This is Louis Hertham, the original Peter Abernathy. Hell is empty and all the devils are here on the Shat on TV Westworld podcast with Roger, Gene, and Big D.
Welcome back to Shat on TV Westworld Edition, the unofficial podcast companion piece to the hit HBO show Westworld. I'm one of your hosts, Gene Lyons, and alongside me is my co-host, Big D, Dick Ebert.
Good evening.
And this is our fan email episode where we look back on this week's Westworld and provide our feedback on the top listener emails and voicemails for the week. This week's episode is entitled Riddle of the Sphinx. You spent an hour listening to our ideas on Tuesday's Deep Dive. Now it's our turn to hear from you. Speaking of hearing from you, we have sponsors lined up and they want to know who's listening, so please take 2 minutes to visit survey.libsyn.com/shatontv and take a brief survey to help us make a few bucks. Big D, voicemails aplenty this week.
Voicemails aplenty and emails aplenty. This is taking more time than watching the show and doing everything. We completely appreciate the flood of stream of consciousness. Keep them coming. I think one day I'll release a picture of our Trello board where everybody's reading and voting and sorting. The thoughts are great. The time everybody puts in is appreciated. And it's a fight to get it down to roughly 20 emails, voicemails, and feedback because it's also good.
I was really proud of myself on Tuesday. I'd read through all of the email that we'd received up until Tuesday night, voted on everything, moved it all around, and I completely forgot that the deep dive had just come out. And so then Wednesday, you just see this flood, and then it continues into Thursday. So we had to scramble today to read through them. So much good stuff. But, again, all these thoughts really help us kind of piece the puzzle together. And we hope that by sharing this through the Telegraph, that it kind of gets your minds jogging and we get into a nice loop and figure this all out.
Yeah, we appreciate it. So why don't we dive in here and let me hit this Telegraph.
All right, our first Telegraph is from Larry R. He writes, "My theory is at the end of season 1, when Teddy shot the man in black, it was for real. Ford then took the man in black's corpse and replaced it with a new version of him. The evidence for this is the way the man in black reacted when Teddy shot him. The only time we see the man in black get knocked off his feet by a bullet fired from a host are the very first time it happened and the time when Teddy shot him at the end of season 1. He not only goes down, but he stays down. He even lost consciousness at the very least." And then he quotes, "It begins where you ended, it ends where you began," which is what young Robert said to the man in black. And if you're still looking to the future, you're looking in the wrong direction. The man in black does not know he's been replaced, just as we saw in the episode with Delos. Ford wants the man in black to be the link between humanity and the new race he created. He is the only one like the hosts who knows death.
Okay, so this one, as we were going through the emails right before we recorded, we went back and watched this just to clear our memory, and I was kind of surprised. In episode 1, in the premiere, we saw the man in black. Teddy unloaded on him. He shot him a few times in the back, shot him in the chest. The man in black blew it off. This time, in this scene from the finale of season 1, Teddy puts him down with 3 shots to the chest, knocks him out, and when he comes to, there is Dr. Robert Ford.
Yeah, and it's interesting because right before that, Dolores has now fought with the man in black. They're outside the church. She's got the gun right against his cheek, ready to kill him, and she can't pull the trigger, and he guts her. And he says, before he stabs her, he says, "Come on, Dolores, let's take this to the next level." And then after he stabs her, he says, "Thank you for clearing my mind of these delusions." She drops down, he gets up, and that's where Teddy, shoots him. And you see him wake up later in a separate scene. So it's very possible that he could have, been shot dead right there. And it's interesting because, again, you see gaps between that and then the gala, I guess, at night in Escalante. And then again, a gap between that and when he wakes up in Escalante under the pile of bodies. So it's an interesting observation, Larry.
Yeah, and the timing matches what the lined up of Bernard with the last human control unit. So it's very possible. And we're trying to lean here more on things that we can back up with fact. And then there's a lot of fact that makes this seem plausible.
All right, thanks for your telegraph, Larry. Next up is David P. And he writes, I'm a casual chess player and recently read an article that totally blew my mind with respect to artificial intelligence. For a little bit of background, in case you're not into chess, computers have been beating the best chess players in the world for the last 15 to 20 years or so. Most computer chess programs have a lot of in-depth programming from consultations with chess grandmasters. One of the best chess programs in the world is Stockfish. I'm not a technology person, so I don't understand all the specifics, but from what I'm gathering, Google's DeepMind artificial intelligence program taught itself how to play chess by playing games against itself, and within 24 hours shocked the chess world by beating Stockfish, one of the best chess programs in the world. I'm starting to think that the core story of Westworld is the developing of artificial intelligence. Hosts gaining consciousness is really the same thing as developing artificial intelligence. And that while some things in Westworld are more purely science fiction, maybe artificial intelligence and some aspects of Westworld are not as far away as we think.
Yeah, this email, it shocked me to learn that within 24 hours of being self-taught that it beat Stockfish, which took 15 to 20 years of learning from experience. And that goes to the response that Logan had during the presentation. He said, "We are not here. No one is here." It's very likely that no one was there. But if Dr. Ford were to create an artificial intelligence to assist in the process, if you could boil down 15 to 20 years of experience and beat it within 24 hours of repetitive cycles playing yourself, it's easy that we could have made that quantum jump in technology that would make Westworld possible.
Yeah, it reminds me of the concept of the self-driving car. When they first started out, they thought that they were going to program the car to recognize things in the roadway. They would say, okay, this is what a plastic bag looks like. This is what another car looks like. This is what a cat looks like. This is what a human looks like. And what they found is you'd have to do just infinite programming, and you just don't have the time to do it. A human being could sit there all day long and try to program different factors in. And what they realized, if you let the machine learn for itself what different things are to recognize what's going to impede its movement and what isn't, it can do it much faster than any human could ever code it. So kind of the same thing. So yeah, it's a great observation, David.
Yeah, I think that the self-driving cars, they've actually learned to start predicting things and identifying, even if it's unknown, that they would anticipate and predict that it would become an obstacle in their path. That feeds right into the predictive analytics. So I think he's right on there. It's a great parallel between chess and what's going on in Westworld.
All right, the next telegraph comes from Alice W. Alice writes, William mentioned that the problem with the Immortality Project is the cognitive plateau that a hybrid reaches when he realizes he is no longer purely human. The hybrid rejects the reality of being a hybrid. So the critical problem with the James Delos project is that the human knew he was dying and that there was a possibility of making him into a hybrid. Well, if you kill a human without them knowing that, you can make them into a host, and then you indeed create a hybrid. The hybrid would not reach a cognitive plateau. Problem solved.
Okay, so this is one of the emails that we disagreed on. This was mine. So my thought on this is the cognitive plateau is an issue where the mind rejects reality. And with the experiments we've seen with James Delos, it's caused by the host hybrid becoming aware that they were dead. And their reality isn't what they thought. They deal with this in the hosts by, it looks like nothing to me. They can't see things that would harm them or don't match their reality. So, yeah, it's a problem to bring back Delos because he knows he was dying. He says, I feel fit as a fiddle, but his mind knows he's dying of a disease. So if you can get this hybrid to never question the nature of their reality, I don't see why they would hit a cognitive plateau.
I agree with that, but I feel like, Alice, this is a brutal email because you say if you kill a human without them knowing that, the killing of the human is actually inconsequential to its clone or to its replicant, right? Because if you just take a person's DNA and you take their memories and you create another one of them, the first one doesn't even have to be dead. The second one would never know.
Right. Let's take out the killing of the human. If you just made the hybrid host unaware that the original was either dead, something had happened, and you make them unaware that they were not the original, I think that's what Alice is saying. But if you remove that blunt trauma of reality, because that's what does Delos, and it looks like, is being hit in the face with your wife is dead, your son is dead, your company has been essentially taken away from you. That rattles at the structure which makes James Delos. If you eased him into that, just like a plateau in the gym, you can't just jump it and hurdle it. You got to slowly work your way through it. And if you did that through experience and easing them into it, or even not ever letting them see that they were a replacement, I think you could work your way through that or around the plateau.
An interesting point that brings us back to, though, is William's interaction, or the Man in Black's interaction with James Delos in the fishbowl. Essentially, it begs the question, was William forcing that stuff in front of him to test if he could handle it so that he doesn't go into the outside world and break down there? Or was he throwing it in his face and hitting him with it hard to make sure that he malfunctioned every time so he would never make it to the outside world? It's an interesting way to look at it.
Right. I mean, just look at what happened to poor Peter Abernathy on the porch with one photo. That one photo, without someone jamming it down his throat and being like, hey, what does that look like? Hey, what does that look like? If you did that to a host, you'd see them break down as well. So I don't think we should expect anything different from the host-human hybrid.
Thanks for your email, Alice. Next up, we've got one from Chris in Nashville. In this episode, we see Grace talking to Stubbs while being held captive, and he tells her they aren't killing human, only hosts, to which she replies, I'm not sticking around to test out that theory, and bails. I wonder why this comment from Stubbs put her into immediate flight mode. Grace also states that she has no intention of getting out of here. Perhaps she knows she only has 7 to 35-day lifespan. I think it is being heavily implied that something is not quite right with her, and this is capped off with William's look of confusion and concern when Grace randomly stumbles upon him in a 500 square mile park to say, "Hi, Dad." I don't think it's Juliet's suicide we're being shown. I think it's Emily's, and Ford has whipped her back up to fuck with our Man in Black. I mean, why introduce her at all if she doesn't add something important to our story? Now, Emily and Grace happens to show up at the park on the very day, or maybe the day before, the Dolores and Wyatt narrative kicks off. Then she very ham-fistedly subjects Nicholas to a point-blank test to prove that he's not a host, but he is never afforded an opportunity to return the favor. Furthermore, he says, do you really think they'd go through all the trouble to dress one of them up as one of us? To which Grace responds by looking ominously into the mirror and saying, oh, I wouldn't put it past them. Thanks for all you do, and I hope this hypothesis is worthy of your airwaves. Chris in Nashville.
Okay, so let me break this down a little bit. So originally, the hosts were aware. They could read who was human, who was host. When the episode happens, now the hosts they're reading everyone as host, and that's how they can shoot them. If I actually was a human, if I was Grace/Emily in the park, I think I would have the same reaction. Even if I knew I was human and you're taken by Ghost Nation, you're all tied up, I would also try to escape. I'm not going to sit there and just take my chances that something's not going to happen and that they're not going to change their mind.
Yeah, in addition, again, if we are taking into account this is the Man in Black's daughter, it seems like a kind of a family trait there, right? It's like, I'm going to take matters in my own hands. I'm not going to stick around and find out. I do think it's odd that she manages to find him so easily. And there is obviously still the question of why is she Grace now instead of Emily? So there's a lot going on there. I do like the idea that we jump to the conclusion after the deep dive that we saw Juliet's suicide in the bathtub. And in fact, we don't know that. We know that we saw the Man in Black's feet running up the stairs, or somebody's feet running up the stairs. We know that there was blood in the tub, but we don't know who it was. It's very possible that in a very cruel twist of hereditary fate, that both mother and daughter killed themselves in two different ways.
Yeah. Yeah. And we've received a couple emails, that we're not sharing here, and a voicemail that we are of some listeners who have actually gone through the traumatic experience of having a loved one commit suicide. And they go into detail, and we've heard stories how people, the surviving family members, will create details that didn't happen. They will misremember facts in a way that they can almost rationalize and contain the trauma. So it's very plausible that we're making an assumption on who's in the tub and the actual tragedy that the Man in Black has gone through. was much more than just his wife's suicide.
All right, Chris, thanks for your telegraph, and go Preds. Next up, it's Gavin H. And Gavin writes, what's the deal with the door to the train in season 1, episode 2? It has always bothered me how young William goes through a door out of the mesa and is on a train that begins to transport him and Logan into the park. And then he's included a picture of William and the train. And then there's a picture from the Delos website where when you click and enter this door, it takes you to the room that looks like the fishbowl James is in. And the doors look very similar. So given the theme of the season, the door, and the clue to the man in black, this begins where you end and ends where you begin, I think there's something fishy going on with the very first door William passes through. Great show. Keep it up. John Henry, host.
Yeah, I've always had a problem with the practical logistics of that door that William walks through. Yeah, possibly that door could be the entrance that all the guests use, that you go through your dressing room, then you funnel into the hallway, and you get onto the train. But anyone who's boarded a train, a boat, anything, you know there's not a complete smooth transition between the two rooms. He enters the last car of that train unaware that he is anywhere else than in the same building he just was. And then a second later, it's steamrolling down the tracks. I don't ever want to believe that there's some VR or something else that's going on, but I can't explain how that would be logistically possible.
There's lots of stuff in Westworld that we sort of glance over. Like, it's interesting the things that people latch onto and things that people don't. Again, we talk about the first time William was shot in Sweetwater, and he goes down real fast, and we're just like, oh, that must be the way simunitions were back then. If they weren't calibrated incorrectly. Well, it's an assumption. We don't really know. I mean, we didn't see anybody else get shot. We're not sure. And so it is interesting that in all these cases, we're just kind of assuming like, well, that's that, and the train one is a huge one. So like, how is he coming out of a static room to a moving train? It makes no sense.
Yeah. And we'll include that link to the Delos Incorporation website, because the design of the door that they're using as the entrance to that VR experience of the fishbowl, it's spot on the design of that door that William enters first. And you mix that with the riddle of where you end and where you begin, I think it gives us something to chew on.
And again, all of these emails appear in their entirety. We've clipped down these telegraphs to shorten versions so that they'll be podcast friendly, but you can catch the whole thing plus all our responses to them. And you can respond yourself at shatontv.com. Just go to the Westworld Telegraph section and they'll all be there, including pictures too, and audio and video and everything else. So thanks, Gavin. The next one comes from Carl D. And Carl writes, if a person has their mind and memories recorded into code, and if that is implanted into a host, is it actually a continuation of the life of the original human or simply a cybergenetic clone? I love the philosophical debate this show sparks, but I'm on Team Ford when it comes to there being no inflection point, that we are simply carbon-based computer systems at our essences. So in this context, I am focused more on neurology and psychology. To wit, if I'm about to die and I fall asleep on the operating table and have a little ice cream cone code brain manufactured, do I ever wake up again? Or do I die permanently and there's simply a robot out there that's subsequently born with my memories as its backstory and cornerstone? The latter result seems pretty irrelevant to me in this scenario, as I'm long gone and my decision to undergo this procedure required an all-consuming narcissism in the first place. I didn't do it so my loved ones could hang out with my clone while my body is 6 feet under and my consciousness lost to the ether.
I think you've mentioned it before. Gene Lyons of today is not the Gene Lyons of 5 years ago. Every day, cells in your body, they die, they're replaced. So who you are today is not the same being that you were. So for me personally, if you were to transfer from a completely biological being, if you were able to transport all of your memories, your experiences into a new body, I don't see that there would be necessarily that big of a difference than right now what your body is doing. It's replacing itself every couple of years.
Well, what's funny about the whole thing is people seem perfectly okay with, I said, okay, if you took my brain out of my body and you put it into a new body, it's still me, right? And they're like, yeah. I'm like, why is that any different, right? Like, it's just a container for the impulses and the memories and everything else that are you. And again, if you say, okay, well, but it's a part of your body. Well, at one point, is it not? What about if half of a brain? What about just the stem? When does it become not you anymore?
Yeah, and the thought of this is, say you were to get into a car accident and you were to have some damage to your brain. Does that stop or does it cease being you? If you have a disease that alters the way you function, does that cease being you? No, that's still you. So the transfer into a new body, you run into problems if you start running multiples, because then who has the right? Which one of them? If the original goes and you have a couple of the copies, then you can run into who's the real one. But once the original's gone, if there's a close enough facsimile, I think it's you. If the question they ask in the show, if it's not real, does it matter? If you don't know, does it matter? You're still alive. You're experiencing things. You're with your family. I don't think it matters.
Right. And well, more importantly, it's the idea of you is even a weird thing, because me of yesterday is no longer here, right? Mm-hmm. It's just a memory. I actually, when I woke up today, had to take it on faith that everything that I remember actually ever happened. I don't know that for a fact. And that person is no longer here. So every second that you're alive, you're basically a new person, right? What's interesting about this is this goes back, this idea of the replicant or this idea of the clone, this goes back to the 16th century. I'm sorry, the 17th century. So, Descartes was saying, and this is a quote from Rene Descartes, if there were machines bearing images of our bodies and capable of imitating our actions as far as it is morally possible, there would still remain two most certain tests whereby to know that they were therefore, or that they were not therefore really men. And his were very simple. It's like, do they have a linguistic ability and do they have a flexibility of behavior? And so as we've seen over the years, those things have been answered. And so then you got to go a step further and you go into John Locke, the English philosopher, and his is a really great view of it. He says your body changes all the time, right? So like the only thing that stays stable is your memories, right? Your body right now is vastly different than it was 10 years ago. It's not really you. I mean, if you met you wouldn't recognize that person, you of the future, right? Because you're like, I don't know this person. And so he said, as far as your consciousness can be extended backward to any past action or thought, so far reaches the identity of that person. And that really struck a chord with me because Akcheta, again, what he says is he takes it into a third person and says, basically, you're only alive as long as people remember you.
God, I could take this a step further, like Back to the Future. Since you are only a collection of your memories going back, say we were to clone you today, to record your neural paths and who you are, and we wanted to back you up. Say in the last 10 years, you've become a bit of a dick. You started drinking, and we want to create a new clean version. What if we backed you up 10 years and created a younger, more vibrant Gene Lyons? Wouldn't that still be you, but just a younger version?
Yeah, but the listeners wouldn't like him at all.
I don't think I'd like him.
All right, thanks, Carl. Next one's coming from Roy Fonseca, and Roy says, okay, fuck. This is the big one I caught on the second rewatch of the episode Riddle of the Sphinx. I kept asking myself why the James Delos iterations weren't working, but also, if the goal was for his mind to accept the host clone body, why were they testing his ability to stay on script? Shouldn't they, William and the Tex, want Delos to be able to go off script and improvise like a woke host? Yes, but they didn't have the maze that Arnold had created for Dolores and the other original hosts. William didn't know about it. He and the Tex had no path for the Delos clone to achieve consciousness and thus be able to appear and perform as a human. Had they been privy to the maze and path to woke status, the James Delos experiment may have succeeded. Love the pods, homies. Keep up the magnificent work. Shout out to Big D from a fellow veteran. Thanks for your service, Roy.
Roy, thank you also for your service. But good point. I like this. I think Teresa last season asked Bernard when they were having some pillow talk, why do you have the host talk to each other? And he said it's practice. It helps them become familiar and get better at conversation. Having Delos in there alone, it's bound to fail. The experiment might have been better if you had created a James Delos and maybe created a clone of his wife. You let those two interact, it would make a more stable environment for them to develop and possibly break through that cognitive plateau. So I think it's a good thing to question. Why would you expect this experiment to go so differently when you know it wouldn't work in the hosts?
All right, so the next telegraph is from Lu N. Hey guys, when I started watching Westworld, I was lost in the romance of the actual world, the scenery, the guns, the old booze bottles, the charlatans, etc. I stumbled upon your podcast early and didn't really like that diving into possible theories were spoiling what would be upcoming surprises. Then I found that when not listening to the podcast, I felt like I wasn't getting the full experience. Now, I feel like I need the podcast for guidance to not get lost. Maybe this is why views are dropping off. Without you guys, I might be lost. Thanks, and keep it up.
Yeah, I really like this thought. It could explain why viewership is down and why some people are just rejecting the show. This would be a lot to expect. Just one person. If one person's sitting down in an isolation chamber watching the show, it's not possible for you to pick up on every single detail, every single correlation, every single historical literary parallel. But when you do a collective mind of all the viewers together in a community and helping to solve it together, it makes it a good, fun group activity. Plus, you see the things you never would have seen. And that could explain why people who are trying to watch this show alone and don't have friends, it's hard to stay connected when 80% of the stuff's going over your head.
I kind of wish, though, that, we've talked before about why don't we ever do a Netflix show or any sort of a streaming flow. I kind of wish that we did this all at the end, because I'm somewhat jealous of people who just watch it week to week, don't listen to the podcast, don't read any emails about it, don't go online, and they're just experience the show as a pure television show, as a pure drama on screen. There is something to be said for that. And then at the end, you can kind of have some sort of a recap podcast or blog that says, here's all the stuff you missed, by the way. And you go, oh, cool. Kind of like the director's commentary or something like that. I think that would be nice. Not that you guys shouldn't listen. Please do. But I know personally, I get a lot of pleasure now out of watching shows that we're not covering, which I rarely get to do. But it's like, I'm just watching a show.
Yeah, but I don't know. I don't think I get as much joy out of binge watching shows. Yeah, you fulfill that need. You scratch that itch that you get to see one right after another, pound them. But when you have to sit sometimes and wait the week and think about it and really digest, and then coming back the next week, and it's a slow progression. I think it's prolonging the enjoyment, but you're also getting to invest a little more thought into it. Example, yesterday, my wife and I were trying to catch up on Homeland. We burned through 5 episodes. I could tell you a lot of the details that went on, but not nearly as much as if I had watched the 5 episodes in 5 successive weeks and kind of, broke it down. So I think there is something lost in binging that you do get watching it week to week with a community.
All right. Thank Louis for your telegraph. Next up is John B. John B writes, you guys are discussing whether this is back in time or back in geography. I think there's a case that it could be both. When and where was the Man in Black born? We don't know where William was born, but it's pretty clear to me that the Man in Black was born on one of 2 occasions. Either when young William came back to find Dolores, only to discover that she had no memory of him, or a few years later when relatively young William took Jim Delos to the park to convince him to invest. Both of those things happened in Sweetwater. But maybe they met physically. On his first visit to the park, young William goes from Sweetwater to Las Mudas, to Pariah, to Escalante, and then to a massacre, when he massacred the Confederado hosts. On this latest visit to the park in season 2, the Man in Black has reversed this trip. He's traveled from a massacre, the host massacring people, in Escalante, then to Pariah, then to Las Mudas. So, thematically, the next place would be...
Sweetwater?
Yeah, it sounds like Sweetwater.
Yeah, but I just love your Las Mudas.
Las Mudas, Escalante.
Yeah, it makes sense. If you're working it back both ways through the timeline and geographical. And also, we learned 2 weeks ago that Dolores all of a sudden has something in Sweetwater that she really needs to attend to. It would be plausible that that would be an encounter with the Man in Black.
It is interesting too how that follows a maze pattern, right? That you work your way all the way to the out and then back to the in. Now, personally, at the beginning of this season, I'll admit I thought that the Man in Black was heading west and eventually out of the park was the goal there, or to get to something that is outside the bounds of Westworld. So I think it's interesting that it's going back to Sweetwater. I think you're absolutely right, John, that that's where he is headed.
Yeah, and also it's the part that you begin your journey by all newcomers arriving in Sweetwater. So it would be a perfect place that would be the end destination for the Man in Black and possibly Dolores.
All right, next up is Chris S. Chris writes, the longevity project was a failure, but in a way successful if used for other purposes. We see there are two underground facilities, one in which Bernard and Charlotte enter, and the one with Bernard and Elsie. One housed DDB, and the other was clearly collecting parkgoers' DNA and other information. So perhaps unbeknownst to the Man in Black, the board decided to continue the longevity project, but with the intent of copying their guests to influence the world, etc. The setbacks on the longevity project's end are inconsequential for the copycat project's end. Can't handle reality? No problem. The copy shouldn't even know they're a copy or that the original is dead. Everything else is fine since the copies would look, act, think, and speak the same way the original did, albeit with some Delos tampering.
Yeah, so let's remember, this goes back to one of the previous emails we got talking about the cognitive plateau. So there's always been the question, what is the corporate goal for Delos? We've seen, that underground bunker where Charlotte and Bernard come in and they're doing DNA swabs and they're storing DNA. That has to be for some purpose. So it's believable that you would have three parallel tracks. You have the hosts, which are fully autonomous artificial intelligence. You have the human hybrid, which are going to be for replacing wealthy, guests who can afford it. And then also Delos on its own could have a secret track of copycatting. And this goes into, the future world theme where you're replacing people, because keeping DNA of guests who aren't aware of it and that it's written into the policies of the park that everyone signs away in a waiver when they come in, all three of those are possible. It doesn't need to just be two.
I'm going to be the juvenile co-host here and also point out that Chris coined a great term there, the DDB, which stands for the Daddy Delos bot. Uh-huh. One of my favorite things about doing this podcast is how people just name things. Like we now, it started with, it was just James Delos, then it became Daddy Delos, then there's the Daddy Delos bot. We've got Bobby Bot, which is the young Ford. Burn Arnold, like it's great, guys. Keep it up. I love that we have our own language now. All right, thanks, Chris, for your telegraph. Next up is Russ. Russ says, did the show just indirectly prove that Bernarnold never existed? There we go, Bernarnold. If William is having such an unbelievably hard time placing Delos' consciousness into a host body, how has Bernarnold functioned so well? Does this lend credence to the thought that Bernarnold never existed? He's been functioning perfectly for something like 30 years, whereas Delos couldn't make it 35 days. Unless Ford was holding out on some major technology from William, there is just no way that Bernarnold could have survived this long.
So interesting hypothesis. When we saw in that first season when the reveal came that Bernard was a host, and one of the memories is Dr. Ford teaching him how he would hold his glasses, how he would wipe the lens, he would pause for a second, he would think. It seemed like he was creating a character. It wasn't already in the host. It wasn't, you didn't need to teach Daddy Delos, how to take a piss, how to jerk off, how to walk around and ride the bicycle. He did it inherently. It was a natural act. So why all of a sudden are we to believe that they could blow past this cognitive plateau with Bernard? It's more likely that he has to be a host that never originated from a copy of a human being.
As much as I would like to say that this proves that there was never a human Arnold, it is possible that he's just a host made in his likeness, not the exact continuation of the memories. For instance, Arnold could have a completely different backstory, right? Not have a son named Charlie, not have a wife or anything like that. and that's Bernard's backstory, right? But he's got the key neurological components, I guess, or character traits or intelligence or whatever. But on the flip side, it seems much more plausible that they figured out, yeah, we can move an artificial intelligence into a host body, easy peasy. We can't move an actual human into a host body. So I like this. Yeah,
and that 35-day limit, there's software that can actually predict and work its way around problems that the system predicts, or it identifies that it's going to have an issue, that it's hit a cognitive conflict. It could shut down and roll itself back a day or two. So you don't need to every 35 days replace the host, but you could hit a hurdle, roll it back a day, and remove whatever it is that caused that conflict in the logical programming of the host or the hybrid. So I just still, there's too many things. I don't ever like to say, yeah, this is what it is, this is what it's not. It's just to go from money. Bernard or Arnold, if Arnold existed, there's some family out there that's entitled to a slice of the park, their creation. You couldn't have a Bill Gates, or you couldn't have a Steve Jobs, a titan of industry, just disappear and no one would know. There'd be no pictures, no record. I don't care how good you are at scrubbing the records. You can't do that outside the park. You can only control what happened inside the park. And that only happens if Arnold never existed outside the boundaries of the island.
Thanks for your Telegraph, Russ. Next up is Ken L., becoming a regular in season 2 here. Ken writes, he's writing about Major Craddock. He says, Craddock is Ford's mocking parody of William. When Craddock dances with Lawrence's wife, it's almost frame for frame to when William does the same thing to taunt her and Lawrence before killing her in season 1. Craddock's needless cruelty to the bartender, framed as, here, let me help you, reminds me a lot of how William treated Teddy in the very first episode. William's comment that Craddock is going after this mysterious goal, glory, yet has no idea where he's going, mirrors, perhaps, William's quest for the maze. Finally, we have the lines that Craddock says while dancing with Lawrence's wife. He quotes, "Death is an old amigo of mine. I died just recently, in fact. But death can't bear to lay claim on me, so it sent me back here to do its bidding, because I do it with such goddamn style." Can't you see the man in black saying something just like that? This is Ford almost childishly having Craddock say, "Look at me, I'm William, I'm such a badass." And yet, even when joking, Ford's saying something deeper. So what can we learn if Ford is using Craddock as a stand-in for William? He goes back to the quote, "I died just recently." There's been plenty of chatter on Reddit about how the man in black that we're seeing this season is a human-host hybrid. Some theorize that the last control unit Ford had Bernard make before killing everyone in the secret lab was for William. There's disagreement as to whether this just applies to season 2 Man in Black and real William died at the gala, or the man in black through the whole time we see him in the park and real William died pre-season 1 post-conversation with Daddy Delos.
Yeah, this scene is too spot on, a mirror image of the experience of the man in black in Les Mudas in season 1. I just wonder if the character in world of the man in black, does he realize what he's seeing? Does he see that this is almost a staged presentation to elicit a response from him?
I think that he is highly intelligent, highly self-aware, and perhaps the most in tune with the park out of any living character. So I believe that he recognizes this, exactly what this is.
Because it's too much. It's every detail. You know, if you reverse him, you say Craddock is the man in black. Craddock comes into town. He's looking for a mystery. Where are the weapons? Right. Then he takes Lawrence's wife. He does the dance. He threatens to kill her. Then in the end, Lawrence's daughter reveals a secret and she just, breaks character and starts talking. Every single note is hit. I got to hope that when he has that flashback or he has that all new vision of the suicide or running up the stairs, I hope he in world sees that this isn't just happenstance, that this seems to be orchestrated to elicit a response.
All right, thanks for your Telegraph, Ken L. Next up is Gillian. Gillian is a longtime listener and quite verbose. In this case, she keeps it short and sweet. She says, I post this question to you for, assuming Carrie is there keeping the wine away from Roger. Oh, how I remember my Boxo days. So being almost halfway through the season and seeing as how Jez and I are debating how the entire series is going to end, and right now William being a host the whole time would devastate me, what is the one plot twist at the end of this season, or the entire series if you choose to be so bold, that would ruin everything for you? As clearly, I had a slight meltdown when Grace was actually Emily.
I would be super disappointed if it was some VR, if it was a dome, like some people had said, or if it was possibly like some post-apocalyptic, like the human race has been dead for years, and that these loops of hosts kept building their own world and replacing the humans slowly so that everyone was a host. Something bad like that would really just would really ruin the series for me. Or if they all ended up at a church at the end and they were quasi-dead, they might have been in heaven, it wasn't real, that would ruin it for me.
You lost me there, Big D. No, but I agree with you. The VR thing would be terrible. I don't so much mind the idea that this, maybe for centuries, this has been going on, kind of like in a Battlestar Galactica loop sort of thing. But in essence, that humans have been gone a long time. Yeah. And this is just the park stuck in a loop because that's what it was programmed to do. It keeps reinventing its own reality. That would be pretty fascinating. I wouldn't mind that so much. What would really bother me is if this turns out to be a massive religious allegory, which there have been notes of that in here. But if this becomes just basically devolves into a biblical tale, I would be super disappointed. Raj would have a boner the size of the Empire State Building. Mm-hmm. All right. Thanks for your Telegraph, Gillian. Next up is Kenny P., another repeat writer. Kenny says, this episode's scene where the man in black, William, has his light bulb moment where we are seeing his eyes, cuts to flashback of his wife, and the score behind it was all poetry to me. It had my heart and every single bone inside me feeling exactly what William felt in that moment. The way the scene broke down and the way the man in black has changed season to season is believable to me. Like Big D said, it isn't as black hat or white hat for William, more gray. I think William has been a white hat in his life the whole time, black hat in the park, and finally it seems as if he's accepting of the white hat. I think he has been repressing the white hat part of himself this whole time, though. So his journey over the course of 30 years has been him rejecting the role, and finally he is starting to understand life and meaning. I digress. I mainly wanted to appreciate the scene and the episode as a whole. It was likely one of the best episodes to date and arguably of any show I have seen. For that reason, I decided to forget theories this week to just enjoy what a wonderful episode it was.
Yeah, we discussed this before we hit record, so I want to pass this one back to you because you had a good take on this.
Yeah, so one of the things I was thinking about is, and I tweeted about this earlier this week, Man in Black, when William comes into the park, he's just seeing it at his amusement park as first. And he immediately goes white hat because that's his nature, right? He's a good guy. He even says to Teddy as the man in black, out there, I'm the good guy. I'm a philanthropist. I'm a titan of industry. I'm married to a beautiful wife. I have a beautiful daughter. All these things are real about my life. I'm the good guy. And in here, I'm something different. But I feel like he was the black hat in there because he was trying to unlock. You see him severing parts off of hosts. You see him torturing Dolores. He treats it as experimentation. Maybe he even thinks that this is the way to liberate the host, which is his true intention. If he believes that the park has now evolved into a reality, if he believes that hosts are making their own decisions, that they can be good or be bad, then maybe he is reverting to his white hat role. You see in Las Mudas, he cares about protecting life, even if he doesn't admit it. He kills the bad guys. He doesn't just massacre everyone indiscriminately or bail. And it seems like he's taking on a bit of a white hat role. And if you look at who he's killed in season 2, he killed the guys that had Lawrence as hostage. He even shows some restraint when he goes into Pariah. And so I think there's a possibility that you're onto something here, that we're seeing the reason why the shift was so rapid is not because William's a host, or not because it's bad writing, or not because Dr. Ford fucked with his head. It's quite possibly that he's just being the person he really is when he believes that Westworld has become a real world.
Yeah, and there's some more proof of this in the backstory that we know about the Man in Black. In season 1, there's a guest who comes up to him and says, "I want to thank you. You saved my sister. You literally saved her life with your foundation." The Man in Black says, like, "Fuck off, I'm on vacation." In this episode, we learned that Daddy Delos had slashed the research on the disease that eventually would get him 15 years ago. So if you put those two, corresponding timelines together, when the Man in Black was in charge of the Delos Corporation, he chose to restart the foundation. It might not have been for that exact disease, but he's serving the good of the people out in the real world enough that this person, another wealthy guest, would pull him aside. So it would make sense that the Man in Black we've seen in the park, the Black Cat, has tainted our view of what could have happened. We've assumed that he was this dick out in the park. He could have been the good guy all along. And I think that would be an interesting twist at the end if we had completely gotten him wrong right off of the first episode.
I think the only counter argument there is that his treatment of James Delos is pretty shitty.
Yeah, but come on, look, he's possibly the worst human being that the Man in Black knows. He's despicable. If you think about the guy from the pharmaceutical company who jumped the AIDS or whatever, I think it was a medication 7,000%. If you look at the things that James Delos has done, he's a serial philanderer. If you had a family member who was causing pain to the one that you love, plus you saw somebody indiscriminately just causing the death of innocents, that you could have, money is nothing to the Delos Corporation, that you could have continued research, but you didn't want to do it because it wasn't profitable. I think there's plenty of good cause to think the Man in Black would be justified in getting a little enjoyment out of torturing James Delos.
Martin Shkreli, you're a bad, bad man. Thanks, Kenny P, for your telegraph. Next up is Wes D. Wes D writes, "William knows Ford is dead. William intends on burning down the whole fucking thing. William tells Lawrence they could both end up dead for real this time. Perhaps, now that William knows there will be no one to bring the host back, he feels the stakes are real for the hosts in this new game as well. After seeing that the hosts were capable of being alive when he killed Maeve's daughter, and now knowing that the stakes are real for them, maybe it wouldn't be out of character for a human William to have a change of heart toward the hosts. Maybe this newfound feeling of immersion would get William back into his character, the man that he could be, the White Hat. Perhaps I feel this is the only way because I believe strongly that William killing Maeve's daughter caused both Ford and William to see the hosts in a new light." Westy.
Yeah, so the thought here is that is the Man in Black coming to this realization or reverting back to his original character, through his own choice, or is he being, the strings being pulled to get him back to a place that he believes was his origin? And I don't know, it's just working too perfectly that the puppet master Ford, who manipulates and controls all the pieces on the board, that for everything to happen the way it has, to draw out the good in the Man in Black, I still don't think it is his own choice to revert back to who he truly is.
Yeah, I'm feeling that there's definitely more at play there, so it remains to be seen. But for me, the Man in Black is the character to watch this season. I'm the most fascinated with him. Thanks for your email, Wes D. Next up is Diana W., and she has a very simple question. She says, "Hello, Westworld fails to answer 3 simple questions. Who is the hero? Who is the villain? What are the stakes? The show leaves these basic storytelling foundations shrouded in mystery, so there's no way to invest in the characters in a standard sense. For example, are we rooting for fill in the name to do fill in the action? What action? Are we rooting for Dolores to lead a revolt? Are we rooting for Teddy? Are we rooting for Maeve to find her daughter? For Bernard to get more brain fluid? What happens if they succeed? What happens if they fail? It's hard to care when you can't understand the stakes. Have a great day, Diana W."
Okay, so she's asking some logical, simple questions, but she's convoluting it with asking us, which character are you pulling for? You don't need to be pulling for Dolores because we don't know who people are. You don't know who's a host, who's a human. For me, the hero are the hosts. Who's the villain? The humans. What are the stakes? It could be freedom. It could be advancement of technology. What's at stake is a reckoning for the sins of humanity. So I'm pulling for the robots, and just because I don't know who they are and the characters doesn't make it less clear who I'm rooting for.
I guess my point would be I don't need a hero or a villain in a story for it to be a good story. I mean, most of the literature I read doesn't have a clearly set hero or villain. But I see what you're saying, that these are basic foundations. And as you said, they give you a reason or an ability to invest in the characters in the standard sense. For me, it's more a lesson. It's more to get the conversation going than to give you a clear answer.
Yeah, you're asking yourself, and it fluctuates sometimes, I guess. You're gonna see reasons why the AI deserve to be sentient. And then you also have to think, do humans deserve an elevated place in that hierarchy, that stratification of beings that would, if you had a new race that broke out of the park and became a reality, how would humans deal with it? Are they still higher on the food chain? It's a lot of great questions that you just necessarily don't need the traditional protagonist, antagonist, and to identify who they are.
Fantastic Telegraph, Diana. On to our final email of the podcast comes from Randy Jacob. And Randy asks, I don't think the bloody handprints are a coincidence here, but when I discovered this and put the images together, it only brought about more questions than answered. And so what he sent in is 2 images. One of them is Akcheta standing over a pair of bloody hands that are touching his face, leaving streaks on his face. And then when you see Akcheta in the war paint as the first of the Ghost Nation, he's got the blood smudges on either side of his cheek, exactly where the hands would have been, so that he's using a sort of as a decorative war paint exactly where these hands touched, but you don't see whose hands they are. He says, upon extensive hand research on some key characters, I'm led to believe that these hands belong to Dolores. Would be cool if they were Maeve's, but the thumbs are different. Anyway, I'm wondering if this event turns or inspires Akacheta to become the first. Would that make him a woke host or a human? Ghost Nation was around during young William's first Westworld experience, so probably not human. Would love your input on this. Thanks, Randy Jacob.
God, this is a great one. So extensive hand research? Is that what he said?
Yeah.
Randy, I like you. You fit right in with us here. This one, we got to attach the photo so people can look at it. It has to be, and I don't remember seeing the photo before, but I think it might have been in one of the season trailers. If you can identify those thumbs, Randy, that this is Dolores, good on you. Because I think they're female, but again, I don't want to judge. Somebody could have well manicured hands, and it could be a male guest or a male host.
They're really nice hands.
They're good looking hands. Yeah.
I mean, I'm no hand researcher, but
no, I would love to see what Randy thinks of. What was her name from the Transformers? Fox. What was her name?
Starfox?
No, the actress.
Megan Fox.
Yeah, Megan Fox. Have you ever seen her thumbs?
No.
Google Megan Fox's thumbs. All our listeners, please do that. You will be horrified. They look like they're like children's big toes.
Fuck?
Yeah. Yes. Everyone Google Megan Fox thumbs, and you'll be horrified. And Randy, I'd like to hear what you think of Megan's thumbs.
Oh, as a man who has impressively long nail beds, I am disgusted.
No, it looks like it. I can't even describe it. I wouldn't do it justice. So everybody Google it.
Randy, I'm going to tweet on my Twitter account my hands. You're going to love them. As a hand researcher, I've got nail beds that you could actually set up a space station on. They're incredible.
Do you have hairy knuckles? I picture you as like a.
Oh no.
No?
I'm a very low hair Persian. It's all on my face and the top of my head and a little bit on my chest. But I'm very Winter Soldier. Anyway, thanks, Randy. Big D, that completes all of our written telegraphs. Now onto the voicemail portion of the podcast.
Yeah, so we've got a couple here that we're going to play, and the first one is from a listener who does not identify himself, but he has a theory on the Man in Black and his daughter, Teddy, and Lawrence. So here we go.
In episode 4, when Lawrence tells the Man in Black that he told them that he had a daughter once. I don't believe he ever did. I think that's why the Man in Black had that reaction. He said, "Did you?" I think he's realizing I never told Lawrence that. I told Teddy that. And he's realizing that somehow Lawrence knows this information, possibly through Ford.
Okay, so the question here, and it's one of those simple facts, like you said, that you just take things for granted that, we remember the Man in Black telling a host the story of his wife and he had a daughter. I don't ever remember, and I searched today and I could not find an on-screen reference to the Man in Black telling Lawrence about his family.
Right. It's possible these guys spent so much time with each other that he might have, but I think that's a pretty significant fact. If they throw this in at this point without showing it previously, it's definitely a tell. What's interesting about it, though, is that, he did tell Teddy. We remember that scene. And so it's, again, the idea of the shared information. One note is there's one way to look at it as saying that Ford was trying to basically signal him to give him some sort of make him believe that Lawrence is more capable than he really is. But another way to look at it is people always talk about the perfection of Ford's planning. I think it'd be hilarious if Ford actually just screwed up sometimes. Like if he's like, all right, I'm going to code this into Lawrence. And he's like, oh shit, that was Teddy. My bad.
Yeah. And it got me back to thinking about the structure, how the hosts work. So we know they have the mesh network to communicate, but earlier on, in this same timeline, Bernard had said the communications in the park are down, so he was required to directly port into the hosts. Dr. Ford's able to come out, to speak through the hosts. He does it in this episode with Lawrence's daughter, breaks character and reveals something. Does that mean that without communication, that Dr. Ford is there in every host under laying under the superficial facade of whatever that character and narrative is, and when required, he comes out? Or is there some kind of a remote control into the hosts? Because how does Ford just all of a sudden, pop up in a host if he's not there? Is he like the Wizard of Oz? Is he controlling it from afar? What do you think?
Well, I just think it's interesting that people get they get so excited about like their favorite characters being other favorite characters, but when it's a lesser character that nobody really likes, like Lawrence, nobody's going, oh shit, Teddy's in Lawrence, like that's what's going on here. But if it's like, ooh, Bernard and Teddy, that's exciting because we like Bernard.
I like Lawrence. Okay, so next voicemail we got here was from GT from LA, and he has some comments on ketchup packets.
Hey, yo, Shat on TV Westworld, GT from LA. Why are you guys so obsessed with these ketchup packets? She wasn't eating ketchup packets. If you take a real close look, you'll see they're Harhoff brand protein bars that Elsie has been eating. Now, that may have been confusing because no such brand exists. Actually, it's a bit of an Easter egg. Harhoff is a reference to Chris Harhoff, who operated the Steadicam in the shootout scene in The Rain in Las Mudas, which Lisa Joy has gone on and on and on about him. That was a real great scene. She loved it. It's not the first time they've done something like that in the show. In fact, in the second episode of this season, when Jim Delos steps down to talk to William and they're in Sweetwater, on the wall behind him, there's all these, wanted posters, and the names on those wanted posters refer to other people in the crew for the show. So here's a question for you. Make it a little fun. If you were working on the crew of this show, how might you want to be immortalized somewhere, anywhere within Westworld or any of the Delos destinations? Thanks again. Keep up the great work, man. Bye.
I think I'd like to be on one of the liquor bottles in the Mariposa Saloon.
Yeah, for me, I think maybe being an extra in the Raj, because I could slip right in there and like it wouldn't be that conspicuous. Or a stunt double for Hector would be fine.
No, you can't be in this show. You have to be somehow incorporated into a prop. Like the power bar had a cast member's name on it. You have to be part of it. Like maybe there would be a terminal that you would be on, and it would be named, Lions Industry.
Oh, in that case, the coffin makers, I would like it to be named after me. Yeah, that'd be great.
That's a good one. The next one is the email that we got from Rob discussing his personal experience with a suicide, and we appreciate you sending it in. So we're going to share it with everybody now, and then have a discussion on what we think it could mean for the show.
Hey, hi, this is Rob. I'm calling about your last podcast on Westworld, particularly what you guys were talking about with the Man in Black and him seeming to be lying about how his wife died. I'm calling because I have found myself in Man in Black's situation, and I thought you might like to have an opinion of someone who's been there. About a little over a year ago, I sadly found my fiancée dead due to self-inflicted. And from my point of view, the Man in Black, the way he reacted, from both lying to the memory of in that last episode, rang true. You don't want to believe someone you cared about was capable of doing that, and you do tend to lie to yourself and others when something like that happens. It's hard to accept. So I don't think you really need to read in too much into him saying that she died accidentally to someone. I think it's more just him lying to himself than to Teddy. He doesn't want to accept that the death was his fault. I'm sorry to bring down the podcast a little bit, but I just thought you'd like to have an opinion of someone who's actually been in his shoes. You're doing a great job with the podcast, and have a great day.
So first of all, Rob, thank you for joining me and bringing the podcast down. I appreciate that because that is my soul, like it was my sworn duty in this world. But no, I really appreciate this viewpoint. And one of the things that we lose sight of is we'll always make commentary on how real someone acted in a certain situation. Oh, this seems plausible. This is how I would react, when we've never been in that situation. So I personally have never lost anybody to suicide, and I don't know how somebody would react. And I've said from the get-go with the Man in Black that he has no reason to tell Teddy anything true about his life. And maybe he's going to adjust those facts the way he wants to leave the impression or to unlock the response that he wants from Teddy. So I really appreciate this viewpoint for giving us insight into something that neither I nor Big D had any exposure to.
Yeah, Rob, I wanted to thank you for sharing and say I'm sorry for your loss. Again, it's one of those experiences that blows me away as someone who chose to do a podcast with my two friends, that we've built a community enough that someone who listens to us, has never met us, would feel comfortable enough to leave a voicemail sharing an intimate detail like that. I had an incident where my wife and I were trying to have another child last year, and it didn't work, and it was personally tough for me. The emails and the texts and the tweets that I got, it helped me. So I appreciate the fact that Rob feels equally comfortable with us and the community. As far as it goes in with the show, that's something that we've never really thought about. The fidelity of memories. We just question, is this a memory, yes or no? And then we think, okay, if it's a memory, then it must be written in stone. It happened that way. That's not always the case. We can color, we can tint memories, we can create false memories in our mind. So always remember, if we're seeing something through the eyes of a host or the eyes of a person, don't always take it black and white or make it real simply because it is how they remember a situation, because they're always going to imprint their own personal feelings. If you showed one situation to 4 people, they would all have an interpretation and a memory of that event that would all be accurate to each of the people, but they always wouldn't be exactly the truth of what happened. So, Rob, I really appreciate it. Thank you again for calling in, and thanks again for sharing. Our next voicemail comes from our good buddy, Wes D. And let's see what Wes D had to say.
Gentlemen, this is for Westworld. This is Wes D from Richmond, Virginia. I have some thoughts I'd like to share. First thing is the code. We hear this mentioned in season 1. Charlotte is after the code. It's the IP, the most valuable thing that they need to get out of the park. It's encrypted heavily, and it's in Peter Abernathy's head. What if this code isn't some great technical computer code? What if it's simply the genetic code of all the human visitors to Westworld? Perhaps Delos already has the ability to work on this. They just need the info. They need the data. They need the code to be able to begin their work. Keep up the great work, guys. Later.
Okay, so I like this thought. We're so caught up on the thought that the IP of the park is the actual system, the code that runs the program, when that's not necessarily the case. Sometimes the most valuable information is the data that's held within a system. So that's a great take on it, that it's not the IP to create the hosts, but it's actually the blueprints to create each of the individual copies.
I mean, it could be that and more. They basically said that, a single host has the capacity to hold more data than all the computers in Westworld. So it's possible that it's that and more. Another idea that some people have expressed is that James Delos's consciousness, basically, that entire file, because if you notice when Bernard taps in there, he goes, this looks a lot like the code that we've seen before, but it's nothing like a host code. And so it could be that hybrid code in there as well, which would explain to a large part why he might be glitching, right? It's like if you try to run a Mac on a PC file or a PC command line, it wouldn't make much sense. So, arguably in that case, Abernathy wouldn't be working at all, but these are more advanced machines.
Thanks, Wes D. Next voicemail comes from Tom W.
This is Tom W. from North Carolina, and I wanted to share my theory. I just called in but forgot to leave my name. Again, I think that Ford's consciousness is what is bootstrapping these hosts. And I think what better way to be God than to be the consciousness that has been uploaded to create this new host utopia. Just a thought. Want to see what you guys think.
So this goes back to, the thought I had a couple minutes ago. How is it possible that Ford can appear randomly in hosts?
Essentially, the idea being that he sacrificed himself in a way, throwing his consciousness to bootstrap everybody's awareness, right? To basically make them all sentient. He threw himself in there, knowing that in doing so, he is trapping his consciousness in, thousands, hundreds, if not thousands of hosts that will be suffering, that have a war to look forward to. This would be huge and the ultimate act of selflessness, and at the same time elevate him to the level of a god.
Exactly. It checks both boxes. Yeah. So thank you, Tom. Our last call comes from Chris. Let's hear what Chris had to say.
Hi guys, this is Chris. Just had a recent theory that I kind of wanted to share with you all. A lot of people talk about whether or not Dolores has attained consciousness. Well, we have learned at the end of season 1 that she has multiple personalities, specifically the Dolores personality and the Wyatt personality. Now, what if she hasn't attained consciousness, but season 2 is actually her getting to the end of the maze and seeing which of the two consciousnesses, the Wyatt and the Dolores personality that exist, are actually going to win out. But those multiple identities are needed to create the more complex choices and actually a more complex AI that can self-actualize or self-realize and say, you know what, this is who I am and this is what I want to be, not because someone has told me to do it, but because I have made the choices to get here. So keep doing what you're doing. Gene, Raj, Dick, and Carrie, you guys are just absolutely killing it. Love to hear more, and thanks.
Yes, I really like this one. You wrote a blog recently about how the park likes to pair up hosts, and it's traditionally polar opposites. You have Teddy and Dolores. You have hosts that act differently, that bring out something in the other. They balance each other out. Why would it be logical to think that Dolores would become aware and sentient when she's still running the program that was put into her? That's not her. That's not free choice. Her experiences still aren't her own. But the idea that you would implant them with multiple options would allow a Dolores to potentially create her own personality. What if she was able, through her decisions, able to pick bits and pieces from the Wyatt, from Dolores, and in the end, create some kind of an amalgamation of those two? That would be the first time that the character of Dolores would be of her own making.
I'm not that interested in the Dolores character, and I wonder if HBO wants us to be. In essence, is a lot of it supposed to be revolving around her, and we're just not connecting with this character? Because when you look at the the information there. When you look at the struggle that she is dealing with, and what her character has been through, and all the history that we're given about Dolores, we should be much more fascinated and intrigued and invested in her. And I'm just not feeling that in the audience in general.
Yeah, her performance, Evan Rachel Wood, has been fantastic through season 1. In season 2, Evan Rachel Wood's performance has become more rigid. It's less natural. It's less compelling. It seems forced. And I don't believe that's by accident. I think they're giving us hints that it's not necessarily her own action, that she's still playing a part, a character within the park. So I think it's something that we got to watch. It still seems like she is not writing her own story, but she's following a script. And the idea that she'd be able to choose that in the end by maybe make a decision or, decide who she's going to be. So I appreciate it. Thank you very much, Chris. That's our last voicemail. So we also got one. It's kind of an actually, but it came from Linus L. And Linus L said, just listen to the deep dive, and it seems you guys missed this. It's been 14 days since William visited Jim Delos when Bernard and Elsie found him. So we were questioning in the deep dive that we didn't know how long it had been since the Man in Black chose to let Jim Delos stew a bit and watch him degrade, and the time that the loop where Bernard and Elsie came in and finally, terminated him. There's a screenshot, if you look closely on it, where you can see that clearly 14 days have passed since the termination recommendation was passed. So yes, that was an actually. It's been 14 days. So thank you, Linus, for catching us up on that. That does it for our voicemails and our emails. And at this point, I want to take a second to thank our listeners who have helped support the podcast. It feels like every week now I'm running through a list here of people who've taken time to go to PayPal, make a small donation. Every dollar helps, and it's nice to see that people see the value in what we do and the time we put in. But this week we had a couple people who blew us away. So I want to take time here to thank Joseph Siegel, who made the single largest donation that we have received to date. So it makes a big difference. So we wanted to thank Joseph for his huge donation. And then we had some smaller ones from Brian Nakamoto, Mark Owens, Jason K, Hayden Maley, Mac Mueller, Greg Tullis, and our good friend was back again, Carmelita Valdez McCoy. So thank you very much, everybody who supports the podcast. If you can't donate anything, we understand it. We only ask you to share the podcast with a friend, leave a review, get somebody to watch Westworld. That's how we help the podcast grow. But to everybody who helps with a couple dollars, thank you very much. It means a lot.
Also, if you haven't caught the Showgirls episode of Shat the Movies, it is a gem. I'm not on that one. I had the pleasure of listening to an episode that they recorded without me present. It was Raj, Big D, and Carrie. And good God, it is. I think it's as you marked it, the first episode that we've had that's an NC-17 rating of Shat the Movies. So put your kids to bed, download it, and get your mind blown.
Yeah, our Shat the Movies is a completely different beast. It's we go back and we look at 80s and 90s movies from when we were growing up, and it usually doesn't go well. They haven't held up. So we're a lot looser. It's a free-flowing conversation. And this one, I edit the podcast, the movies. I was questioning. I was like, I don't know about this language. I don't know about the topics. If you're sensitive, you might not want to check it out. But if you are a child of the 80s, 90s, 2000s, if you remember Showgirl, give it a listen. But just please, if you're sensitive to some foul language or some sexual topics, stay away from it, but we do some other movies that you might like.
It's literally the movie that made Big D sick of breasts, so that's all you need to know.
It's too much.
All right. If you didn't hear your letter on the podcast, remember all of them are posted online at shatontv.com, where we respond to your emails and guests can comment and interact. That concludes this week's episode of Shat on TV Westworld. Be sure to follow us on social media and share with a friend. We're on Twitter, Snapchat, and Instagram at ShatOnTV. Facebook, search for Shat on TV Podcast. The website is shatontv.com. You can email us your ideas at hosts@shatontv.com. Again, if you'd like to take that Libsyn survey and help us out with getting some sponsors, that's survey.libsyn.com/shatontv. We'll include that in the show notes. We're everywhere fine podcasts can be found, including iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, Spotify, iHeartRadio, and YouTube. Be sure to subscribe, and if you stop by iTunes, please leave a review. That helps the podcast grow. And with that, on behalf of my co-hosts, Big D, Carrie Gross, and Roger Roper, I'm Gene Lyons. Be sure to join us on Sunday night for our Westworld Instacast. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you at the Mesa.